Hi everyone, my name is Fab and welcome back to my channel. Today I want to talk about two books by Stephen King that are connected in a way. They were published roughly on the same time, one after the other, and these two books are connected by an event that is a solar eclipse that happened in 1963, according to these books. And these two books are Dolores Claiborne and Gerald's Game. This was published first in 1992 and this was published later in 1993. When I picked up these books, I knew that they were connected. I already watched both of the movie adaptation by these two books, and they're both amazing. I love the one with Katie Bates. It's a great movie that is from 1995, and the one from Gerald's Game has been made by Netflix in 2017 and stars Carla Cugino, Bruce Greenwood, and Carel Struycken. They're both really good and they're both very close to the books. I should have started reading this one first because this one is previous. It was published previous to this one. But given I watched the movie not long time ago, I decided to give it a break so that I could read something different. And I started then reading Dolores Claiborne because I always wanted to read this book and I was curious. I have this book for a long time. It's a bit yellow, as you can see, it's a bit old. But I wanted to read this one because I watched the movie Dolores Claiborne a while ago. So I wanted to see how the book was and if it was really close to the movie adaptation or if they changed something in the movie. So I started with this one and I was surprised on how good this book is. This book is set in Little Tall Island, that is the set where the storm of the century take place. And this story starts at the police station where Dolores Claiborne is talking with two police officers because she has been accused of homicide. We still don't know if she's guilty or not about these murders, but we are on her side anyway because her voice is so strong and so funny in a way because she has a way of describing things in a very funny way. She's very direct, she's a very sassy and strong woman, so she doesn't mince her words. So this book talks about a woman called Dolores Claiborne, of course, that found herself accused of being a murderer. And that's because the woman that she worked for, it was a wealthy widow, was found dead while she was the caretaker for her. So we see how this story starts at the police station where Dolores Claiborne is telling the two officers what really happened, and she's kind of confessing what had happened. I'm sorry if I'm going to do some spoilers, but to talk about these two books, I unfortunately have to because I won't say everything, but I have to tell a lot about this because otherwise this review won't make sense. I can talk about anything. But the amazing fact about this book is that this story is told all at once without any breaks. There are no chapters. It's like a stream of consciousness by Dolores Claiborne that is confessing what happened to her in the past. And this story started a long time before this murder that she's accused of took place. It happened when she married her abusive husband, Joe, that is an alcoholic man and very abusive towards her, and is also abusive towards his child as well. So the thing that drove Dolores Claiborne to the position in which she found herself at the police station right now is because everyone suspected that she made her husband disappear, and they all think that she did the same with this wealthy woman that they found dead. I love this book. This book is amazing. I don't know why it's not talked that much because it's great. I loved it. Like the voice of Dolores Claiborne is so strong, it's so convincing, so real that you feel the pain for her. It's a very emotional book. It's not a horror book in itself because it's not scary at all, but it's such a good story. There is so much depth into this character, and I think this is one of the best characterization in Stephen King works, because there is so much depth into this character. We know a lot about her, and it's so well written. Such a simple story that becomes interesting for various reasons. The story is so well plotted, and the characters are so good that the whole story is amazing. I think this might be one of my Stephen King's favorite books. I didn't expect this book to be so good because I never hear people talking about this one, and I was really surprised. She has a really strong voice, and she's amazing. You love this character, and the fact that I watched the movie before reading the book made me depict in my mind Dolores Claiborne as Kathy Bates, because she was such a good actress in that role, like the one that she did in Misery, but in this one, like, you can really see Dolores Claiborne as Kathy Bates, and she herself admitted in one interview that that's the best role that she accomplished, the one that she felt the most, because she felt like she was portraying a real character. And that's true, because this character is well-rounded, like it has everything that you need to love this character. Despite the fact that this book is like a stream of consciousness, so it's all at once without any breaks, any chapters, uh, could have been difficult to read, because it is a challenge in a way. But of course, if you want to stop, you can. You don't have to read it all at once like I did. But I was so interested in the story that I didn't want to put it down, because the story of Doris Claiborne is so compelling, and there are so many things. She was living this abusive relationship with her husband for so many years before finally she was released from this kind of curse that was her husband. And the story is so engaging. Despite being without breaks, the story goes so quick because it's told through her voice, and we are on her side all the time. We want to know what happened during that eclipse. That eclipse is something that connects both these stories, because both these stories talks about two women that lived in darkness for all their lives, and this eclipse was the main trigger that made them live in this kind of obscurity that surrounded them. And to face this darkness, they have to do very heavy stuff. They have to deal with heavy secrets that will help them to overcome their weaknesses, overcome this darkness, and then go into the light and live their life to their fullest. These two are very strong books, are very feminist book, you can say, because they both talk about some kind of domestic violence. In fact, these are part of the trilogy that of domestic violence from Stephen King's works. The third one is Rose Madder. I haven't read that one yet, but I will eventually. But I don't think that book is connected like these two. So these two are strictly connected because they are mentioned in both their books to the other one. So in this one, they talk about the girl that is Jessie in Gerald's game. And in Gerald's games, we talk about Dolores Claiborne. They're no name because this kind of connection is kind of a telepathic connection. And I don't know why King decided to do this thing, because it doesn't really make that much sense to connect these two stories in this way. When I picked up these books, I thought that one was the prequel and one was the sequel. Like that Dolores Claiborne was the first one, because I didn't know that the Gerald's game was published first. Then I realized that they had different characters, because I thought that Jessie was actually Selena from Dolores Claiborne when she was a grown up. So the two stories are just connected by this thin line that is the eclipse, where something happened in both their lives that led them to the situation in which they found themselves in the present day. This is what I can tell you about the connection about these books. I don't know why he decided to do this. It would have made sense to make like the story of Selena the one that is Jesse's story, but probably because he wrote this one first, he didn't know how to connect with this one, or I don't know if he was writing this at the same time, so maybe he already planned to do this thing and he wanted to put this slight paranormal aspect into these two books, because apart from this there is nothing really paranormal. They're not horror, so this is kind of more like a drama or a mystery, and this one is like a thriller. There is some body horror in this one, but it's just a scene, and it's probably the most known scene about this book. I won't tell which one it is, you have to check it out for yourself. So we see how this woman suffered a lot in her life, and the duties that Dolores had to deal with while she was working for Vera are very disgusting sometimes. In that sense, Stephen King didn't put limits to his imagination, so we see everything as it is. There is a lot of shit in this book, if I can tell you, literally, and that's disgusting. But apart from that, it's a really good book, and I loved it. I think this is one of his most accomplished works. It's very, very good. I loved it. I found some kind of parallels between this story and 1922, because they both involve a well and something that happens there. I don't want to say that much, but if you read one of them, you know what I'm talking about. And if you don't, then read them. What are you waiting for? But despite that, the 1922 is the opposite of what this book talks about, because in this one we talk about some kind of justice. In this one, in fact, we see how the inequality between men and women were very strong in the past, is still an issue nowadays, but at that time it was worse. And one example is the episode at the bank. I don't want to go too much in detail, but when you read this book, you can see how men overpowered women for so much time. And even if Dolores Claiborne was the one that was paying for the bills and putting the bread on the table, working for Vera until exhaustion, if you can say, because working for Vera wasn't easy at all. Her husband has always the final word on everything, and that's kind of annoying, and it's what make you angry about what happened to Dolores Claiborne. You feel for her and for what happened to her. That's why I love this character and how she became a strong woman and overcame her abusive relationship with her husband. This is the kind of story that make me love Stephen King so much, because they're so centered into the mind of a character, and they're so emotional in a way. This is a bit like The Green Mile, and I love both these books. This one was a surprise, but I really loved it. And I think this would be a good start for a new King's reader. Maybe like starting with The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon would be a milder choice. And then you can upgrade to this one. Unless you want to start with something stronger, then you can go straight with Dolores Claiborne, because this is amazing and it's not scary, so you can go on with this one. This is also a really good book, but I won't recommend new King's reader to start with this one if they don't want to read something that is a bit scary and disturbing, because trigger warning that I have to give you about both these books. There is not just domestic violence, but there is also child abuse in both these books. This one especially deals into this aspect deeply. There is a scene in this book that is very disturbing. Is in the middle of this book, and it's very difficult to go through when you're reading it. But despite that, this book is so good. I didn't expect this one to be as well so good. This is one of his most underrated books, and I don't understand why. Because there is so much depth into this character, and it's so well written that I don't understand why no one talks about this book. Jessie's character is amazing. She's another woman that has to overcome her weaknesses and deal with the sufferance and the abuse that she had dealt with all her life, this kind of darkness that she had lived inside for her whole life. And you can see how sometimes your weaknesses can help you to overcome your troubles, your issues. So what this book talks about basically is about a couple called the Burlingame. They were going for a romantic weekend into their summer house in next to a lake, but they're going off season, so there is no one around them. And Gerald has some kind of fetishes when we're talking about sex. He is into some kinky stuff, and they started mildly because they wanted to spice up their relationship, but eventually Gerald decided to go further with this kind of fantasies, and this started with Jesse, that is the main character of this book, tied to the bed with some scarves. By the beginning of this book, Gerald put the bar higher, and he decided to use actual handcuffs. So he handcuffed his wife to this bed, and while Jessie is handcuffed to the bed, a memory from her childhood triggers some painful thoughts, and she wants to stop this game, but Gerald doesn't seem up for it because he thinks that she's faking it, that she's just going home with a role in bed. He doesn't understand that she really wants to stop. This is very different from the movie because in the movie, the character of Gerald seems to be wanting to accomplish this rape fantasy that he has in his mind, and a little bit is also in this book, but there is this ambiguity that you don't really know if he wants to accomplish this fantasy or if he's just confused by Jessie behavior and think that she's faking this reaction. So also the way in which Gerald dies at the beginning of this book is not a spoiler. That's what happened from the start, from the first chapter. In the movie, Gerald takes Viagra, and that's what caused him the heart attack. In this book is the reaction of Jessie that kicks him back because she doesn't want him on top of her, and she kicks him in the nuts and in the chest, and that's what leads him to have this heart attack. So this is different from these two stories, but the movie adaptation is very, very close to this one. All the details, the important details, were in the movie as well. And after Gerald has this heart attack, Jessie found herself handcuffed to the bed, and she really can't free herself. So this story takes place in about 2 days, maybe a day and a half. But it's so stretched, the story, that it seems like it's longer, and you kind of feel the pain that she's feeling, like that survival instinct that leads you to do atrocious stuff in order to help yourself and to free yourself from a really hard situation. And it is very hard, the situation which she's in, because there is no one around that can help her, and she only can count on herself and on her own resources to free herself from this situation. We see how she deals with the demons in her mind, because during the books we see how she hears voices in her head, and she said that she heard these voices all her life, and probably they started when she was molested as a child, because I don't know if Stephen King wanted to talk about MPD in this book, but the fact that there are these voices that are triggered by this harsh situation that Jessie is living may be because of what she experienced when she was a child. So these voices are the ones that in a way encourage or discourage Jessie during this book. In the movie is different because the voices are the one of Gerald that is dead, when instead in this book Gerald is dead and we don't hear from him anymore because he's dead, of course. While in the movie, the two voices that she hears are, one is her own voice and the other one is Gerald's voice. So that's a bit different, but I think in this one works better because of course these voices are the voices of the people that try to help her when she was younger, and that try to help her through her life to overcome this kind of trauma that she brought from her childhood and she never overcame. So of course these voices are trying to help her in a way, and sometimes they're being an obstacle to her own achievements. So it's an interesting concept to see how these voices work in her mind, and how they help her to go through this horrible situation where she finds herself in. Despite the story in the movie is very complete from what is written in the book, there is so much depth into the character of Jesse, because it's, as in Dolores Claiborne, we see a lot about this character. I noticed that Stephen King is very, very good in telling stories from a women's perspective, because he can immerse into their minds and let us know what are their feelings and their emotions, and how they have to deal with everyday life in a man's world. So that's why I say that these two books are feminist books. We see how Gerald was also overpowering and controlling Jesse's life when they were dealing with their marriage. I think this story deserves a lot more attention, because it deals with heavy topics that needs to be talked about more. And I like how at those times Stephen King was trying to talk about some things that were swept under the rug, and things that usually were not talked about, like domestic violence. Stephen King goes into territories that are difficult to deal with in a book, and that involve some heavy topics that sometimes are not easy to express, but he did this with both these books in an amazing way. I was surprised to see how this book was underrated, also because if you think about it, this story takes place all in a bed, and that's amazing. That's genius, because to stretch this story, such a simple idea, a woman cuffed into a bed, for over 300 pages. It's amazing. I love how Stephen King works on simple concepts, and then works around the character to describe the whole story and write something so amazing, because this is pure genius. This is brilliantly written. I loved everything about this book. The first part is a bit repetitive sometimes, but I think what Stephen King was trying to do was to put in our minds the trauma that Jesse was suffering. That's why it was being very repetitive about some concept, because it didn't want probably to make us think that these were something that we could pass on, because the kind of abuse that both these women have to deal with are very different. Not both, the three of them, because in Doris Claiborne there are two women that are suffering abuse. So he wanted us not to pass over this abusive, heavy stuff that happened to them, and so that's why it's probably is constantly reminding us some concept through this story. But the whole book is amazing, and I don't understand. I think more people should talk about this one, because it's really good. I don't understand why it's not considered one of his best works. Maybe because it's not horror like other stories, but there is some horror anyway in this book, because the creature that is made of moonlight that Jessie sees when she's handcuffed to this bed is very creepy. And in a way, when I was reading it, I was thinking that maybe that description of this creature probably led to the creation of the Slender Man, because the Slender Man is described as a creature very pale, with long arms that looks like tentacles, and the same thing with this creature that she sees in the darkness. There are two mentioned in this book. The first one is from one of Stephen King works as well, that is It, because she talks about a faceless, nameless creature, some It. So this is kind of a reference to the book It. But there is another one about Hannibal Lecter that is a character coming from the Silence of the Lambs, and the movie was made not long before the publishing of this one in 1991. So probably he had some kind of inspiration from that movie, and it talks about some kind of stuff here That reminds me also of the serial killer Ed Gein, that is the one that inspired The Silence of the Lambs and a lot of other movies. I already talked about this in the Psycho review if you want to check that one. But in this one, there is some disturbing stuff, especially at the end of the book, that remind me of the story of Ed Gein and, of course, of Hannibal Lecter, because it's basically mentioning that one in this in the last part of this book. In the movie, instead, there is a mention to Cujo, because Gerald talks about the stray dog that we see in the book and in the movie as well, and he calls him Cujo. And that's a kind of reference that makes sense, because in this book, like in Cujo, we see the falls of the stray dog as well, and it's also a homage to that book, and I like that because it reminded me when I was reading Cujo, I had the same feeling basically. These two books shows the talent of Stephen King in building stories from very simple concepts and make them bloom into something amazing. These stories go into deeply into the mind of the characters, and how sometimes people have to face their fears and to challenge their demons, fight them and overcome hard situation in order to get on with their life and to go into that light that they really need. So to get out of the darkness that has surrounded them for all their life, they have to do this. It's a concept that I'm repeating a lot, but it makes sense because this is basically what this talks about, and this is basically why these two books are stories of an eclipse. Eclipse brings darkness, so it makes sense. So this is all I can tell you about these two books. I hope you enjoyed these reviews. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up, subscribe and hit the notification bell. There are more reviews coming. I am reading other books. I know it took a lot to do this one, but I'm sorry about that. I really needed some break, and I really needed to read this one especially more carefully, because it involves some very heavy stuff, and it needs attention. So I hope you enjoyed this one, and I will see you to the next one. Bye.